Good to have everybody back this evening on this holiday weekend. If this was a Bible class, I would open this question up for you to respond. Which presidents died on the 4th of July? On the 50th anniversary of our country, John Adams passed away. He had been close friends with Thomas Jefferson early in their political career, and then they had a falling out for years. Towards the end of their life, they kind of reconciled. And among the last words on John Adams' lips was, "Jefferson is still alive." Thomas Jefferson died just a few hours later. 50th anniversary of the country that they fought for. 5 years later, James Monroe would die on the 4th of July. We have one president who shares a birthday with our country. He was born on the 4th of July. Calvin Coolidge, born on the 4th of July. A president who was sworn into office by his dad, who happened to be a justice of the peace. He was the vice president when Warren G. Harding died suddenly of a heart attack. What is a pivotal moment in your life that has changed your life forever? Again, if there's a Bible class, I'd open floor up and let you share some experiences from your life. Some moment that was powerful enough in your life to change your life forever. 1994. I was a graduate student at Freed-Hardeman, and a friend of mine named Les and I were driving to southern Illinois to preach on the weekends. And Les heard that a congregation just north of Henderson was looking for an associate minister. So he decided to go up there on a Wednesday night and give his resume to the eldership. But he didn't want to go alone, so he talked a few of his preaching friends to go with him. So there were four of us, Todd and Chester and me, with Les. We went up there on a Wednesday night. Les ran into a friend of his, a girl, Joanna Tarbett, and a friend of hers, both from Freed-Hardeman. And so we went out for ice cream after Bible class. Sat around and talked and laughed. On the way back home, back to Freed, Les told us that there was another young lady at that congregation from Freed-Hardeman that he had dated at Freed, and he decided he wanted to go up the next weekend to see if he could relight an old flame. So we all went back up there the next Wednesday night. She wasn't interested. So we got together with Joanne and her friend, Rachel, for ice cream. And we sat around and talked and laughed. Chester got Rachel's phone number. On the way back to Freed-Hardeman, we were talking about the night, and Chester commented that he was not planning on calling Rachel. And we said, "Why not?" He said, "I was just being friendly." I said, "Well, give me your phone number. I'll use it." It's a powerful moment that changed my life forever. It was 4 months after that when we went to a professor's house, Glenn Hinton, who had been a member of a mission team in Argentina for 16 years. And his presentation in his house that night was on doing mission work as a team. A fellow graduate student named Eric Welch came up to me after that presentation and said, "Paul, would you be interested in being a part of a mission team?" A powerful moment that changes your life forever. I'm guessing that every one of us have had something like that, probably more than one, in our lives. You think about the decisions that each individual person made in either one of those examples that led to what happened. You know, we never know what kind of influence or impact we're going to have on people. We never know. And that's why it's so important for us to direct people to Jesus in everything that we say and do, in the best way that we can, so that because of our influence, we might contribute in some way. It might be a huge way to their lives being improved. So tonight I want us to take just an example out of the life of Christ. You saw on the screen, we're in Matthew chapter 12 tonight. Open your copy of God's Word to Matthew chapter 12 and let's take a look at an example out of the life of Christ where He touched a man's life and no doubt changed that man forever. And we'll take a look at the repercussions of Jesus' behavior towards that man. That will also change Jesus' life forever. The background to our text, and we're going to pick up with verse 9, but the background to our text, if you look back at chapter 11, beginning in verse 28, Jesus tells His followers, "Come to me, all you who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." The Jews pictured the law of Moses as a yoke. And when you added in the Pharisees' traditions on top of that, it made the yoke extremely heavy. And we're going to see that type of yoke illustrated in chapter 12. The burden that the Jews had living under strict and dominant traditions of the Pharisees. When Jesus refuses to submit to the Pharisees' traditions, of course, it motivates them to seek a way to destroy Him. Now, the controversy, the source of the controversy, beginning in verse 1 of chapter 12, is the apostles plucking heads of grain and eating that on the Sabbath day. It's not, the controversy is not what the Bible actually said. The controversy grows up over what the Bible does not say. The Sabbath day rest, and how the Pharisees were interpreting that. What the Bible says about the Sabbath law was easy enough to understand. Now, the Jews took the Sabbath law extremely seriously, especially after the exile in Babylon. In a book of history that is generally considered to be fairly reliable, First Maccabees, it's not in our Bibles, it's in the Catholic Bible, we see where the Jews were willing to be slaughtered because they would not fight in defense on the Sabbath day. That's how seriously they took the Sabbath law. Now, the first time, according to Matthew's gospel, that Jesus is challenged by the Jewish leaders is back in chapter 9. And those were scribes who said that Jesus blasphemed when He forgave the sins of the man who was let down through the roof. You all remember that story. In that same chapter, the Pharisees criticized Jesus because He ate with tax collectors and sinners. Again, in that same chapter, chapter 9, verse 34, the Pharisees will accuse Jesus of casting out demons by the power of Satan. And so we actually see this controversy between Jesus and the Pharisees beginning to snowball as we read through the Gospel of Matthew. It's getting more and more intense. Now, the Pharisees don't show up in chapters 10 and 11, but now they come back in chapter 12. And they accuse Jesus' disciples of violating the Sabbath law by plucking the ears of grain and eating it. Now, that's not sinful, but that's a subject for a different time. The word Sabbath is used in chapter 12, verse 1 for the first time in Matthew. And out of the 10 times that Matthew uses the word Sabbath, 8 of those times are right here in this chapter. So we see this man in need. Let's read verses 9 and 10. Departing from there, now notice in verse 8, at the end of the controversy about eating the grain, Jesus says, the Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath. To the Pharisees, he's saying, get that in your heads. The Son of Man is a Lord of the Sabbath. Okay, so verse 9, departing from there, he went into their synagogue, and a man was there whose hand was withered, and they questioned Jesus, asking, is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath? So they might accuse him. As we get the whole picture, we combine Mark and Luke's account of this same thing. Jesus has called the man to stand in the presence of everybody, in the presence of the Pharisees. And Jesus turns to question them. Is it lawful to do good or to do bad, harm on the Sabbath? To save a life or to kill? And the Pharisees are silent. Now, Mark tells us that Jesus looked at them with anger, grieved in his heart, because they had hard hearts. And that's where Matthew picks up down in verse 13 that we'll get to in just a moment. The law of Moses forbid work on the Sabbath day. We all know that among the Ten Commandments. Now, earlier God had emphasized how important the Sabbath was back in Exodus chapter 16. The word Sabbath is found in the Old Testament 111 times, beginning with that text in chapter 16. The law also required Israelites to be considerate of their neighbors' animals that Jesus is going to refer to here in just a moment. So we've got this controversy brewing over the Sabbath that is concentrated here in Matthew chapter 12. On the Sabbath day, Jesus goes into their synagogue where they are worshiping, mainly reading the law and praying. It's mainly what synagogue worship involved. And there was a man there whose hand was unusable. It was paralyzed, maybe atrophied from some illness that he had. It might simply have had some disease in it that was unusable. So the Pharisees ask Jesus if it was authorized. That's not a bad question. Is it authorized to heal on the Sabbath? Tradition, the Pharisees' tradition would say no unless the healing was necessary to save a life. That's the only justification the Pharisees would allow healing on the Sabbath, as if they had a whole lot of experience in that. So Matthew gives us insight into their motivation at the end of verse 10, that they might accuse him. Their animosity has become more and more evident since chapter 9. And they are wanting to take Jesus into court before the Sanhedrin. So we look at verses 11 through 13. Jesus said to them, what man is there among you who has a sheep, and if it falls into a pit on the Sabbath, will he not take hold of it and lift it out? That's work. How much more valuable then is a man than a sheep? So then it is lawful to do good on the Sabbath. In other words, Jesus points out that the Sabbath law was designed to restrict work, but everything you do on the Sabbath is not work. And so he said to the man, verse 13, stretch out your hand. He stretched it out and it was restored to normal, just like the other. Now, Luke tells us that Jesus knew what the men were thinking, to emphasize to us that Jesus is divine. So Jesus responds to their challenge, to their lack of mercy, their lack of compassion, by asking if any of them had a sheep that fell into a pit on the Sabbath day would not remove the sheep out of the pit. That was an action that the tradition would allow. So the Pharisees would respond, yes, that's acceptable. And yet a human being is more valuable than a sheep. And so Jesus answering their question, yes, it is authorized by the law of God to heal someone on the Sabbath, because a human being is more important than a sheep. To emphasize that Jesus knew the law and knew how to interpret the law, that he was the Lord of the Sabbath, verse 8, he tells the man to extend his hand. The man extends his hand. Nothing said about the man's faith, but he extends his hand. And the hand was whole. It was as healthy as the other. Same condition. And now verse 14. But the Pharisees went out and conspired against him as to how they might destroy him. The hatred of the Pharisees for the Son of God reaches a pivotal point there in verse 14. You might want to make a note of that in the margin. This is when the Pharisees start planning to kill Jesus. They start consulting with one another how they can destroy Jesus. Now, Luke tells us that the Pharisees and scribes were filled with rage as they discussed what they might do with Jesus. Now, it's going to take some time for them to lay out their plan. We don't know, like this morning, where chapter 12 fits in with the overall chronology of the life of Jesus. It takes some time for them to work up their plan. Mark tells us that the Pharisees join in with the Herodians to destroy Jesus. The Herodians are only mentioned in the New Testament, not secular sources. So scholars can only assume that the Herodians were supporters, Jewish supporters of King Herod, which means they were extremely political. Jews who were extremely political support King Herod, who supports the Roman Empire. So it's ironic that the Pharisees, who hated the Roman government, are joining together with the Herodians, who supported the Roman government. And they join hands together because they have a common enemy, and that's Jesus Christ. The word Sabbath is mentioned a dozen times after the gospel accounts. 10 of those are in the book of Acts, where the Christians have interactions with the Jews. 1 Corinthians chapter 11 and verse 2, the word is used for a week, first day of the week, as Paul discusses the worship assembly of Christians, which would take place on Sunday, the first day of the week, rather than the last day. The word Sabbath is never used for the day that Christians worship. I don't hear it so much anymore nowadays, but there was a period of time in our history where Sunday was called the Christian Sabbath. The New Testament never refers to Sunday as a Sabbath. Sunday is not a day of rest. It's a day of worship. In Colossians chapter 2, verse 16 and 17, if you would turn over and take a look at this text. Colossians chapter 2, verses 16 and 17, the Apostle Paul is drawing a contrast between Jesus and the Jews who were trying to impose aspects of the law of Moses on the Gentiles. And Paul writes that the Sabbath and other aspects of the law of Moses were a shadow indicating the Son of God was coming. Therefore, no one is to act as your judge. If you're a Jewish Christian, Paul says, don't let your Jewish family members judge you because you don't keep the Sabbath, or in regard to food or drink, or in respect to a festival or a new moon or a Sabbath day. things which are a mere shadow of what is to come, but the substance belongs to Christ. So since Christians no longer celebrate the Sabbath, they should not be concerned about the Jews who were judging them for their behavior. Now, if you think back to our account that we've been looking at tonight in Matthew chapter 12, think about this. The Pharisees are critiquing Jesus for not observing their traditions, but then they take counsel together to put Jesus to death, to murder Jesus, which was in fact forbidden under the law of Moses. To put it more simply, the Pharisees were planning to break the sixth commandment because they were accusing Jesus of violating the fourth commandment. Of course, they didn't see it as murder. They saw it as getting rid of a blasphemer. Of course, they didn't have an answer for his miracles. So Jesus touched this man's life. Practically everybody at that time, unless you were a teacher, a rabbi, or among the Romans or Greeks, a philosopher, where you could get paid for teaching. Most men at that time got paid for manual labor. So you could imagine that if a man did not have use of one arm, he could use the other one, and I've known a few people who had only one arm, and they were pretty productive, more productive than a lot of people with both arms. But your productivity is still limited. He was probably a beggar. But not anymore. Now he's restored whole. And now he can go to work, and now he can do something productive. You could just imagine how his lifestyle went up because now he can work for himself. That interaction that he had with Jesus likely changed his life forever. And you've got to believe that he became a follower of Jesus Christ. If he lived through the day of Pentecost, you've got to believe he obeyed the gospel. How could you have a miracle work like that on you and not believe the message of the man who did it? But this event also changed Jesus' life because it stirred up the Pharisees. It pushed the Pharisees over the line where now they're beginning to plan to kill him. The snowball is rolling downhill, and it'll pick up speed in the last week of the life of Jesus. So we touch people's lives on a daily basis. Hopefully it's always for the good. Likely there are occasions when it's for the bad. That's when we should have the courage and the humility to tell somebody, I'm sorry I acted that way towards you. Even if we don't know the person, even if it's a cashier and we lose our temper with them, even if they're non-Christian, we should go back to them and say, I'm sorry. I didn't treat you the way you deserve. Because we have an impact on people's lives. And we need to make it as best as we can because we can change somebody's life forever. You may have brought someone to church who eventually became a Christian. Your interaction with them changed their life forever. Somebody might be going downhill and being discouraged, and a word of encouragement turns them back around. That might change their life forever. Who knows? But the more we reflect the life and the teachings of Jesus Christ in our lives, the more positive our influence will be on other people. If we can help you tonight in your walk with Christ, let us know. Let's stand and sing together.